In a recent report titled Challenges to the Space Security, the Pentagon, or the U.S. Defense Department, warned that the space will be probably a battleground between the U.S., Russia, and China. It is known that the United States is not willing to lose prominence in the field and accuses the two others of possibly developing laser weapons and inspections and service satellites to disrupt, damage, or degrade American satellites and their sensors. On the other hand, the United States is accused of fueling international tensions with such allegations. The President of the United States, Donald Trump, ordered on June 2018 to the same Pentagon the creation of a space force, which would be the sixth branch of the armed forces of this country. Let's see, what we're going to be speaking today is space and possible dispute. This is what we're going to be speaking today. We're going to have information, more guests, and as always, we have your critical thinking. Let's begin. Let's start. On July 13, French President Emmanuel Macron announced the creation of the Space Military Command, the renovation of a satellite park, and to launch to the water a day before the nuclear submarine, New Generation Suffren, that would be the first of various in its type. Immediately, questions arose. For example, on July 16, 3 days after the announcement, the Communist Party of France denounced that Macron is actually incorporating France into a new confrontation scenarios such as cyberspace and outer space. They argued that the President hides his interest in following Trump in the arms race and in their galaxy war. This doctrine hits his public finances and the purchasing power of the population, because they're probably going to be, this is going to be paid through more taxes. And it says that the party says that in the same direction goes the recent nomination of the former French representative to NATO, Philippe Berrea, as head of political and security affairs. It is a figure of the neoconservatism, said the spokesperson of the Tolda. What really France needs is to regain its independence and to be the bearer of peace proposals. This means moving away from NATO, defending international law, ratifying treaty of prohibition of nuclear weapons, and respecting all agreements that violate the United States. This was said by the party. Let us listen to Macron explaining himself, and then the minister giving details about spending so many euros. We're speaking about strengthening our strategic autonomy, which must be part of the European framework. The idea is, under the authority of the minister, to respond to challenges in the terrestrial field, naval and aerial, but also in the new zones of confrontation, like cybernetic spaces and extra-atmospheric. The new space doctrine that has been proposed by the Defense Ministry and that I have approved will allow us guarantee our defense, strengthen our knowledge and the situation of space, and actively protect our satellites. And as well, to reinforce our capacities, we will have an aerospace army. We have decided to launch a new weapon program called Dominate Space, with dual purpose, surveillance and active defense. According to the time we intend to cover with this project, we will need an additional 7 million euros, additional to the 3.6 thousand million already allocated to the total renovation of our satellite defenses. So, let's go to our digital websites. Let's start with Radio Perfil, and the Russians do not believe Apollo 11 got to the moon, landed to the moon, and want to go there to prove it. This was published on July 19th of this year. It also says that Russia has said on several occasions that the United States never landed. There was never a lunar landing. And there's a poll that the author speaks in the first part of his analysis, through which 24% of the population don't believe it. They think it's a myth. 76% say that the United States never landed on the moon on July 20th, 50 years ago. These numbers have grown, according to the Pew Research Center of Washington. On the bottom, we've got some more information, but for now, let's go to telesur.com. On August 16, 2019, says Venezuela denounces tensions of the U.S. and their intention to take over. Well, it turns out that the ambassador, Jorge Valero, said during the conference of disarming, "We share the claims of Chinese ambassadors Li Song that the U.S. government wants to monopolize the outer space, since it considers that space it belongs to them, from there to threaten outer assets of other states." The same concern was expressed by the ambassador Gennady Gatilov. This is the ambassador of Russia, and says the U.S. government intends to place weapons of mass destruction in the outer space in defiance of peace and security of mankind. There is what Valero said, along with the other colleagues. They defend the virtues of the agreements of Venezuela has signed with Russia and China in this regard. Let's go now to World Order, that published The Militarization of Space, Last Frontier of Power Politics. This was written by Diego Uriel, writing from Liechtenstein. Let's go down, let's scroll down the article. Let's find it at the end. It's an extensive report. He graduated from International Relationship by the Complutense of Madrid, specialist of international policies. Among other things, he speaks of this wars race, and it also develops this military doctrine, and says about China that it has several satellite testing, and it has advanced in the field of outer space power. Diego, on the bottom of his article, he speaks of the Russian military doctrine of 2010 and the revision in 2014 that consider the militarization of space and deployment of strategic arms of precision is one of the greatest threats to the security of the country. So Russia rejects the display of arms in space. That is why they've tried to push a preventive agreement of arms in space. Well, all of this information is interesting because we can contrast the doctrine of one country and the other. And I close with our recommendation. We find it in Hispan TV of August 6th of 2019. It's a militarization of space. Is this a new war? Dr. Carlos Santamaria is who wrote this. He's a specialist in Latin American studies. It says, in space, the autocrats and merchants of the war continue their efforts to take over, and not only of the backyard, but of the cosmos, of the universe. Thank God these objectives will probably not be fulfilled. This is what Carlos Santamaria thinks. We'll see the opinion of our analysts further on. This is our recommendation for the day. We're going to another point. There is a treaty in 1996 that is of the outer space, and it was signed in this agreement. There is some consideration of how this area should be used, and so no power could take over. Let's see how the legal use of the space is supposed to be according to this legal framework. It was approved by the General Assembly of the United Nations in 1966 and signed in 1967 by the USSR, UK, and United States. Ever since 2017, many countries have adhered to this instrument, and it defines the space as a space of public, of general interest. And it speaks of all of the outer space and the moon, and they're all free, and they should be nobody should take over or use nuclear weapons. Their use should also be peaceful, and there should be mutual collaboration. And the space could not be taken over by sovereignty by any country. Ever since 1958, several resolutions of the United Nations have been approved, and all of them are headed for the peaceful use of the space. But they do not prohibit the use of satellites that have been used by Russia and the United States. Well, there's much more information to add to everything that we've already spoken of. We're going to be speaking with some guests to widen our view on this topic. After we go to our first pause, we'll analyze how the space is used as an appendix of the powers of the countries, and why is there so much interest in this space, and what France has done. Let's not forget what he said. And are his statements, maybe it's a shift to war, and maybe he wants to push forward the space war that Donald Trump has been pushing forward. Is there a risk of space conflict? This is what we're going to be asking our guests right after our pause. We'll be right back. We're back in Critical Moves. Let's see our ideas that we already spoke of. Space, is this a war space for as a new conflict? In this first part of the analysis, we want to see what is this appendix of the war. The dispute for hegemony we see in land between all of the big powers. Is there going to be a reflection of this conflict in space, even when this is a shared space that should be explored for pacific ends, and the nuclearization or militarization is prohibited in the Treaty of 1967, which is written down. Let's continue developing our ideas. Space is a dispute between the U.S. and USSR. Now is a new space where people have all of their expectation. Historically, the U.S. has had a conception that has been exposed ever since Donald Trump reached the White House. The millionaire has said that it's not enough to have a presence in space, but it's necessary to have the domination, the U.S. domination, because space is a war space. Russia and China defy this global domination of the U.S. Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping say that they're worried how the militarization of space has been developing, and they've spoken of the need of developing legal frameworks to have a treaty on the prohibition of arms in space, use of force, or threaten to use them against objects in space. On March 27, in the United Nations, there was a discussion of this. There was a report of experts of the United Nations to avoid an arms weapon in Washington, but Washington, without giving any explanation, blocked the discussion of this document. The Chinese envoy said that they were compromised to going through with this agreement. Well, what comes next is give us more clarity. First, let's listen to the President of the United States, Donald Trump, speaking on February 19th in the Oval Office of the U.S., just when he signed the U.S. administration has recognized space as a priority for our administration. We are investing in new space capacities to project our military capacity and safeguard our interests. Now the leadership of the U.S. in space is more important than ever. China also spoke through their department, Liu Oxiulang, and said, we're conceiving a laboratory for investigating that's at the service of everybody, just like the international regulation says. This might make us think that this goes in a more intelligent line than that of Donald Trump. We are in development. Our capacity is increasing. We have made more satellites and aircrafts. I think that the breach between us and Russia is diminishing, and I think we're going to reach them soon. This past year in March, Vladimir Putin called to the reflection in this sense. I would like to call your attention on the fact that there will be no instruments to limit an arms race in space. I hope you understand this, because we should ask experts their opinion, because we would always have nuclear weapons on top of our heads. Well, for the analysis, I would like to add Dr. Laios León Borja. He's from the University of Puerto Rico. He's a security and military intelligence expert. How are you, Professor Lajos? And let me know when we can talk to Carlos Martinez from Valencia. Here we have our second guest of the day. And he has collaborated with us on several occasions. Professor Lajos, I would like to ask you our questions. Is space clearly, can we see it clearly as an appendix or a place where the geopolitical struggles that we see on land are reflected? Well, this could be a war in the future, and this could be a near future, to have a domination of the exterior space. And the fact that the United States does not want to sign a limitation on the war display, on the weapons display, it's because they might think that they can have an advantage and they don't want any limitations on this. So in case of a war, they could take advantage of this, of their position, and dominate the outer space, just like it was in the Second World War with the domination over the space, airspace. This was used against Japan, and this was used against the German. Well, this could be also used for outer space, and the use of weapons that could be totally new, and that were known at the past like of science fiction, and that some of this science has already been developing. Thank you, Professor Lajos. I would like to go to Carlos on this question. Do you agree with our previous guests? Hi. I think that the development of technology is part of our world now. And we've got satellites, we've got much of this technology is already here. It's not like satellites that are going to aim at us. I think that what's going on is the civil use of these weapons. So if there's a war that would be using this type of this weapon, could affect the whole humanity. And there would be a huge leap in the arms race. I also believe that the space race nowadays is now basically Pacific, and there's a shared use of the space unit. And up until now, there's been a consensus that space is a shared territory. However, with the psychopath in the White House, this can change. And there's a new process that would be opening. So we have to pay attention to every move that the U.S. does in trying to break an agreement that everybody stands for. Carlos, I would like you to help us talking about the actors of this dispute, because we see Russia, China, the United States, but according to what we see in the first part of our analysis, France also wants a part of it. We saw an announcement of President Macron just a month ago of a military space command, and this would be a big investment for them to go forward with this doctrine. Well, it's a double mistake, because internally, France has been a model of policy where the well-being of the people was above everything else. So when health, education, security is their priority. But if you're going to put some money into space race, this would be just a propaganda for Macron, because the president wants to regain part of the national pride. However, we have seen how in this past time the frictions between Europe and the United States have been increasing. So either your enemy is the US, which it is not, or China and Russia, which they are not enemies either. And this would be a big mistake, because Macron should have Russia and China as allies, as friends. Thank you, Carlos. Let's go to Professor Laios. How do you see this thing? Well, of course, we have the satellites with several military purpose, and a power like the United States, who's denying the capability of the satellites and just to keep theirs. These are meteorological satellites who try to determine military moves of other country. This would be like the system of the GPS, or, for example, the intelligence satellites that are for recognition or early detection. It could be through radar or infrared. And what they do is detect any missile that has been launched. And there's other remote detection that could be done with laser radars that from space could detect and could several electromagnetic spectrum, or to detect tanks that on land could be camouflaged. However, from space, they could be easily detected, or even detect invisible airplanes, which could not be detected on land, but from the space this could happen. So in this arms race, the thing would be to destroy the enemy's arms and protect your own. But when I'm speaking of new types of weapons, when I lived 24 years in Washington, there were two analysts who on different occasions, he himself said that the technology of the science fiction movies like Star Wars already exists. That's what he told me. He didn't go into details, but that's what he told me. And what he said is that it was a document that said that there is a recognition, advanced recognition systems of space, and they spoke of wormholes, just like the science fiction movies. And they spoke of this. They were not speaking of the movies. They were speaking of the technology, and of spacecrafts that could fly at an incredible range, and several other technologies that we've only seen in movies. In fact, they've spoken of the Aurora that the Navy had. That was some type of aircraft that could fly on air and go underwater too. So if these if these exist already, if there's a war, this would be their card under the sleeve. Thank you, Professor Lajos. I would like to go with Carlos from Valencia. Do you think there's going to be a common posture? Is this a main objective? Well, at this moment, this proposal of Macron has probably made everybody else raise their ears. And now in these days, it is clear that there is an economic recession in France. So they must have been very surprised. The European Union has no problem of security with any third country. So, on the contrary, the European Union is following the lead of other countries. So, I think this message was surprising. And what he was trying to do was to recover the few popularity that he still has. And from being a very highly regarded politician, he has dropped to very low levels. So with this type of measures, he is trying to recover popularity, but he's making a mistake. What people in France are seeing are something much more terrestrial, like increasing pensions and not investing in something like this. Thank you, Carlos. Just one last question for Professor Lajos. The precision. How much more advantage does one country have over another? Well, they're nose to nose. I would say that the U.S. has highly classified information, which they will not reveal, but I would say that right now, the Chinese and the Russians, but first the Russians and then Chinese, but they're nose to nose, and they're both developing war systems of space. The Russians already had them, so the Russians, what they're doing is to modernize and build new technologies based on of their research of the past century. And the U.S., I think that maybe they were a bit asleep in the past decade because their interest was the struggle against terrorism, and there was an interest to develop intelligence framework that could penetrate in this against the war against terrorism. So what you could see is people that are hiding in a forest, but they were much more interested in sensors On the other hand, China and Russia continued working on this. Well, by now they've been able to develop arms systems that now the United States probably has to try to take a lead on this again, because both China and Russia have very sophisticated weapons. But with the intelligence and the espionage, both countries and all of the countries developed the same thing. So I want to mention that John Bolton has even said that the hypersonic technology for aircrafts that could go 5 times faster than the speed of sound and that would be much more faster than the Vanguard system of Russia, So they copied that from the North American people. Well, that's not true. The Russian car has an antecedent in the Tupolev. That was a company that used to design aircrafts. It was a vehicle, a supersonic vehicle, developed by the Russian since 1957, but that the leader of Russia canceled after some flights of proof, of tests. But apparently, the Russian have used as a starting point the investigation of 1960 and 50 to develop the avant-garde aircraft. So what I'm trying to say is that there is a weapons race, and that Russia is well located in this race. The United States doesn't have the weapons that Russia does, and they're still trying to develop. And the best thing would be a moratorium that would stop the big powers from taking a war to space, or at least to prevent a war in space that would become a world war. But however, there is no will for this in Washington, and the attitude of John Bolton of saying that Russia doesn't have technology and whatever they have has been stolen from the U.S., this is part of this arrogance that you can see. I saw it when I lived 24 years in Washington. This is on behalf of many analysts, not everybody in the U.S., but they always try to say that they have technology and the Russians don't, and that they're not willing to limit themselves with treaties because they want to keep on fabricating these new weapons of war. So it's this attitude that unfortunately is now directing the U.S. White House. Neither does Bolton know anything. And now there's a very dangerous situation because they underestimate their rivals, China and Russia. Thank you very much. I would like to thank my guests from Valencia and Puerto Rico for your time and your input. So we could summarize all of this. Space, great frontier, where powers also fight for hegemony. The outer space consists of regions of universe, outer space of the atmospheres of celestial bodies. It should be divided by the aerospace and land areas. Initially, it was thought it was void of matter and complete with ether, but then it was discovered that it contained hydrogen, electromagnetic radiations, cosmic particles, and very other forms of life that is not known to man. Additionally, from other stars. Several forms of life that is not known to man, and that is not proper for human beings, and of course it's vulnerable to airspace. So to survive, they need a space costume. There is no limit between the airspace and space. However, the space has set a line of Kármán that is an altitude of 100 kilometers, and the regions are geospace. The second one is the lunar space, the interplanetary space, interstellar space, and the intergalactic space, which is the physical space between the galaxies. There's a militarization and weaponization. The first one uses space for military purpose, and the second one deploys weapons in space. It could be those weapons that are displayed on Earth with the possibility of destroying space. First observations, let's see. Aristotle said that it was empty. Then Parmenides said that it was also empty. Then the French Descartes said that there was another matter in space. Then Sang-Heng said that space is infinite and extends beyond the sun and the stars. The first manned space flight was in 1961 with Yuri Gagarin on Vostok 1. Why is it important for the powers to get the cosmos? It's because it's the last great frontier. Just like cyberspace, the outer space is priority and strategic for the United States, Russia, China, and now also France. All of them want to get great steps on this, and there could be a spatial conflict. The starting point in the race would be the Soviet spacecraft launching Sputnik on October 4th of 1957, which happened in the midst of an arms race between the U.S. and the nuclear war threat as a deterrent. Russia had lots of successes that were going over the U.S., and this motivated the United States to push forward. In 1958, Eisenhower created NASA, and then Kennedy also pushed it forward to go with the Apollo 11 that took the first man to the moon and sent a superiority message. This was a little bit of what our guests were saying. Let's go to our last pause, and we'll be right back. Is there a multipolarization of space, or is it getting full of arms and militarization of this area that, as we've seen, is also strategic? We'll be asking our guests when we come back. Geopolitical war space. We've seen that all of the powers want to have an advantage. So let's ask our question once again. Is this a war? Is this a weapons race? Soviet Union and the United States had a cold, hard war where the development of the space development was also involved in all of this. Both countries also developed their arms. Now, China and the United States are the two actors. The United States is very worried about it. Jay Raymond, during a conference, admitted that China has bigger capacities to destroy all of the military objects in space because they have great capacities. China has great objectives, among that to create a space unit for themselves and to land in 2020 with a rover on the moon. They also want to keep on investigating other planets, and they want to bring moon rocks for investigation. They also want to put a man on the moon. On their hands, the United States wants to send people, human beings, to Mars. The answer to the China's advance is to have a wider view on space. That's why Donald Trump wants to create a space command, because he says that China and Russia be at the forefront. Let's continue analyzing, this time with Luis Pázara, with an specialist. Thank you, Luis, for being with us.
Hoy estamos espaciales, decía yo, y todos se reían, pero es verdad, hay un marco jurídico que presentábamos al comienzo, el Tratado del Espacio.
Today we are going to see the 1967 agreement. I think it's not enough, and the resolutions that were done from the last century. Well, in fact, the 1960 was the historical context. There was a space race back then between Russia and the United States to see who got first to the moon. And there was a development so this marked this agreement. Because this agreement only regulated arms in outer space, but it limits everything that has to do with the use of weapons in space. And it's too soft. This agreement is not an imperative use. So Russia, China, and the U.S. are trying to push to have a process of militarization. This would be like a passive type. This means that they would have bases, military bases, of course. This is what the U.S. wants. And this has especially been said by Donald Trump. In the case of China and Russia, there are a bit more complementary positions, because they say that both say that they should not be used for military uses. And right now the problem is that these countries are developing their capacities to counteract one another. Because all of these countries could put some arms on space and create a bigger problem. Because right now there's 10,000 space objects that have been sent by man, and 6% of these are active, and the rest is just space trash. And let's not forget that all of our internet and satellite location is done from space. So China doesn't want the U.S. to militarize space, because that gives them time to develop their own weapons. So that's why there is a balance to try to attract the U.S. and to not have a one-polar activity. Undoubtedly, China and Russia have their military development, but they first have to close the gap to confront the U.S. Many magazines that are experts on this topic have informed that the technological breach has been closing little by little, not only in air but also in tanks. In the case of China, they developed anti-satellite missiles that they were tested in 2007. There's a series of elements that also let us see that there could be an arms race in space. France has also said so. But of course, they have a budget that is not enough, because the space generates a lot of needs a lot of money to develop technology. Other countries like India and Japan have also put their eyes on space, and they've launched satellites and developed technology to make torpedoes, but they don't have the level of China, Russia, and China. So we can say that it's a very elite group. We've got other countries like the ones of the Middle East who have the resources. So this is not for every type of country. In any case, Venezuela has launched 3 satellites with the Chinese support. This has been able to help to have benefits in the health field. However, we've got another topic, is of this of a super developed weapons that could destroy other weapons. And with this, Russia did not agree. In the year 2006, George Bush spoke of mobilizing missiles to the frontier with Russia. And this was a threat against Russia because they think that this could affect their national security. That's why Russia has developed supersonic missiles that break this anti-missiles barrier and put a balance between Russia and the US. China is also developing these aircrafts to be able to cross the frontier of security of the U.S. So all of these countries want to close this gap. So space in itself is a new ground for investigation and positioning of the countries. The U.S. has consolidated this power with the fall, ever since the fall of the USSR. This is, they've got these satellite destructions that are used by the U.S. However, this has posed on the U.S. some weakness because they cannot protect their own satellites because of the technology that's been developed by Russia and China. So if they're not able to do so, they have to give up spaces that China already has. So we can see the relationship of what's happening in space as well as what happens on the land. So without a doubt, space will be the scenario of war in the future, not in the present, but in the future. However, the other side that must be analyzed is the commercial aspect. In the year 2015, President Barack Obama approved a policy of business in space, which allowed some companies to have access to technology to be able to start exploring what is out space. So the United States is going against this treaty. Obviously, this is a treaty, a soft treaty. This is not of a use cogens, which is the use of every man. So, of course, the U.S. develops technology which is only for their use. So how interesting. This is a new chapter in our analysis. Thank you, Luis, for your input. You're always welcome. Let's expect to see you soon. Let's go to conclusions. Without a doubt, it's a reality that we must know, and we have to be closer every time because the threats and struggles for the control of space are increasing, even though it's a small elite or a very select group that is immersed in this certain race for dominance. It's the United States with an arrogant and supremacist posture, while China and Russia have adopted a more complementary stance based on a peaceful vision and to use, but also dedicating efforts to narrowing the gap in favor of the United States. This poses a risk. It helps that the legal framework is insufficient because it's in the soft law. France, with the budgetary problems and internal crisis, chooses to prioritize space development. This is what our guest said, Carlos, and this is a propaganda measure and a militarization error because it goes somewhere else. The militarization is there, but it's passive. However, it's warned that the wars in the future could be played out in outer space. This will all depend of the superpowers, of the will they have. Let's continue analyzing this, such an interesting topic. Thank you very much for being with us. See you on Monday.